A very warm welcome from the team of the Radio Festival to all of you esteemed guests. We are extremely glad and we feel delighted to host such an esteemed panel that is spread across the globe right now, and to talk about something that is so relevant and a medium that has stood the test of time and has time and again yet proven its resilience. So thank you so much for to all of you for being a part of this panel. And I will quickly take this opportunity to introduce our moderator, Mr. James Cridland. Mr. Cridland is the editor of Pod News, a daily podcast newsletter, and he is also a radio futurologist, a writer, consultant, and public speaker on Radio's Future, who's currently based in Australia. So thank you so much, Mr. Cridland, for doing this, and I request you to take it forward.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist. I'm very pleased to be here, although less pleased to be talking about a pandemic, to be honest. But I hope all who watch this are safe and well. Just before we begin, I'm talking to you from Brisbane in Australia, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Turrbal and Jagera people from the Yugara Nation, the traditional custodians of the land that I speak to you from today. We've got a great panel, so let me introduce you to them. First, let's talk to Anders Held. Anders is in Stockholm in Sweden, and he's head of international relations at Swedish Radio and the co-founder and manager of Radio Days Europe, the European Radio Conference, and of Radio Days Asia, a virtual conference happening next month. Anders, you normally organise a lot of great conferences around the world. The pandemic, of course, means that things have changed. Radio Days Asia's in next month, but not in Kuala Lumpur as originally planned. Is that right?
That's right, James. It will be virtual, as we can't travel. Anyone can travel at this time, so it will be all virtual over 3 days. You can sit at home and be part of that and get to know everything. So I'm sorry I can't be in Delhi this time. I was at the wonderful festival over the last 2 years. In the meantime, we have to stay connected this way, virtually, as with Radio Days Asia, also later in March.
And are you planning any sessions around COVID-19 at Radio Days Asia? I'm sure you are.
Indeed. I mean, the whole focus will be about how will the media future look when we come out of COVID? How do we prepare for that situation? I think it will not be exactly the same as before the pandemic. And many radio stations, podcasters, they are struggling in this time. Of course, there's lack of income, of course, and many other things are changing around us. So we have to be prepared to how do we get safely out of this, and how do we recover as an industry coming out of the pandemic.
Absolutely. From Sydney in Australia, Olya Buyar is the head of radio at Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union, the ABU. The ABU is the biggest broadcasting union in the world. Its members reach 3 billion people across the Asia Pacific region. Olya, for those of us who don't know, what does the ABU do? What sort of companies are your members?
Well, we have more than 250 members who are broadcasting members as well as broadcast industry members. And members range all the way from Russia and Turkey and down through Central Asia, through Asia proper, right down to Southeast Asia, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. So we have all of the broadcasters, particularly the public service broadcasters, but quite a number of community and broadcasters that are commercial. So all the way through the whole spectrum.
And the Digital Broadcasting Symposium is coming up in early April, which looks at both radio and TV. That's going to be virtual as well this year, isn't it? What are your main themes there?
Well, I think we're going to be talking a lot about what has changed forever with COVID and how we are going to cope with that, both in radio and television. And I know within the ABU, there's been a lot of talk about that. With our members, we've been talking about that. Over the past 12 months, we've had a lot of webinars and a lot of master classes and a lot of sharing of experiences of how all of our members have coped and how they continue to actually thrive, particularly in radio. So I look forward to DBS and our other online activities, which increasingly I think the whole year is going to be full of as well.
Yeah, indeed. In KL in Malaysia, Philomena Ganana Pragasam is director of the AIBD, the Asia Pacific Institute for Broadcasting Development. I'm going to call you Philo because everybody else does. Philo, a similar question to you. What is the AIBD?
Okay, so I think it's very it's an intergovernmental international body. And like the ABU, it has lots of media members from across Asia Pacific, also Africa and West Asia. So we have quite a lot of members, more than 108 media organizations, and of course other partners. So basically we deal with media, and I think the mandate of AIBD is to make sure that both radio as well as television keeps going and remains relevant. So that we can have more conferences like this, James.
Now, I've been privileged to speak at a number of Asia Media Summits, and I hope to speak at more. What are your plans for this year around that?
Well, we are not having a summit. That was a unanimous decision reached by the board. But what I'm doing is a lot of activities in line with what's happening around the globe right now. Right, so that's what we are focusing on, because Asia Media Summit has always been a face-to-face event, a chance for people to network and so forth. So we're not going to stop that, and right now it's not safe. So we're doing other stuff, and we'll slowly be releasing it on our website. Yes.
Philo, thank you. The final panelist I'd like to introduce is in India, Archana Kapoor, the founder and director of this very conference, the Radio Festival in India. It's the 4th year of the Radio Festival. Very different times though, Archana.
Indeed, very different times, very difficult times, but I wouldn't say very depressing times. It's exciting in its own way. But for this pandemic, we wouldn't have connected across continents. And that is something, so we always keep a very positive bent of mind, and we look at what we can do in the prevailing circumstances. Because I come from the community radio sector, and so, it's so different from the commerce-driven and the government-driven sector. So our main focus is on the communities, and that is something that you can never let go of. So throughout the pandemic, we have been on the ground, we have been working, and as soon as India started opening up, we were there traveling across the country, reaching out to not only our own communities where we work, but also the communities that community radios serve. And here we are doing a hybrid affair. We are doing an online and an offline festival. We've scaled down because, as Anders said, money is drying up, people don't have money. It's all gone into COVID or the vaccine. So yes, there are certain kind of pressures, but the spirit is there, and we feel quite gung-ho about 2021. And despite what India has seen, I think radios have played a phenomenal role, and that is why we are here.
Now, you're the station manager of Radio Mewat, which is a community radio station in Haryana, which is close to New Delhi. The station's 11 years old this year. Perhaps I might start this panel session by asking you about the technology and how you've kept your staff safe during the pandemic. Have you allowed them into the studio? Have you done anything special in terms of allowing them to broadcast from home? What have you been doing there?
Allowing broadcast from home is not an option for community radios, because where I run this station, and I would like everybody to come one day and see where I work, it is one of the most marginalized communities in the country. And although it's very close to Delhi, but yet in terms of development, it's very far. So we didn't have that as an option. And then because, we had this whole thing about a Tablighi Jamaat community meeting happening. And, then the whole, for quite some time, people felt that COVID spread so fast because when people went home or to their communities, they carried the virus with them. So we belong to one of those communities, and we were in the red zone for quite some time. So obviously, we had to curtail our movement for about 2 months, but then we had to get permissions because there were a lot of issues. People were feeling, there was some kind of stigma and discrimination against the whole community. there were a lot of issues with the population that we serve. So we had to take special permissions and go and start visiting people. And this was, again, as I said, an opportunity for us, where we realized that livelihoods were taking a beating, other things. So, as a community radio, we just don't broadcast, but we stay engaged with the community. And that is where we found our content. So we started this whole process of mask making, and we started providing livelihoods to women. We distributed over 55,000 masks to the community. We got their voices. We went to the villages because they were not allowed to move out, but we had special passes. So our reporters went into the community. At the same time, we all have been dealing with that. There was a lot of myth busting which had to be done. So we kind of played the bridge between the government and their narratives and the communities and their stories, and started doing content for all the 300 stations in the country. Being in Delhi, some of us are based in Delhi, and the radio runs about 70 kilometers away. So we kind of started serving as the bridge and brought in content and did a lot of work which I didn't think that we had the capacity to do. So working from home was not an option for community radios. Yes, all safety protocols, all hygiene, everything. Safety first was the motto, but community was also at the back of our mind. And so between safety and community, we kind of built this bridge.
Absolutely, and I will definitely come back to you and talk to you a bit more about your journalism and the messages that you've been putting out on the air. Anders, looking at Sweden as one example, have there been a lot of people broadcasting from home in your country?
To protect the broadcasting organizations which play such an important role in a pandemic like this, in a crisis like this, people were urged to work at home as much as possible. So the big public broadcaster to which I belong, the Swedish radio, everyone that could work from home were obliged to do so. So just a small portion of journalists and technicians and whatever you need in the radio house, everyone else worked from home. So if you had in an administrative role, that's no big problem. We have good internet connections. Everyone has computers that can connect and so forth. But also the broadcasting were actually made from home, even full programs, because we are fairly technically advanced, and we are already invested in technology that you could work from outside in different ways. So it was more done so to be able to do outside broadcasting with very handy equipment. But this came very handy then broadcasting from home when you couldn't really go out and so forth. So lots of programs, also reporters in the newsrooms and so forth, have been working from home and still are and still will be for some time.
I was interviewed the other week on the ABC here in Australia from somebody who was sitting in his front room just interviewing me, and that ended up on national radio, which is always fun. Olya, the ABU does an awful lot of technical work. Have you been advising stations on how to effectively broadcast from home and other places and deal with the very, these effects of the pandemic in terms of employees and people?
Well, we have members who are huge networks, and we have members who are very small, and everything in between. So, for example, we have VOV, RRI Indonesia, CCTV, and CRI. All of those are massive networks who actually did probably a hybrid kind of doing it from home as well as doing it from studios. But by and large, I mean, ABU has been very much at the forefront of talking to its members about how they adapted, particularly in technology. I have to say that radio adapted a lot quicker and a lot easier because we have telephones, and as you know yourself, communications in Asia are very easily done from your phone, as opposed to Australia, where I am currently, which you can't really get good signals from too many places. So our members were doing actually quite well in radio. It's almost like they were reborn, because they went very much locally. They reached out to local audiences, and that actually reestablished the trust and reestablished their audience base and make them a lot more trusted. So we found that the more local that they went, and that's what they've been talking about, the more that they got back from their audiences saying how much they needed the service. They were pumping out messages about COVID and what was happening in their local communities, which of course exactly what people wanted to hear. And in those days, particularly right in the beginning, people really wanted to know everything there was. So information was of the essence. So they turned to the people they trusted most, who were their local broadcasters. And I'm happy to say we're still working with our members, and we're still now trying to figure out, together, how do we move on from this, and what becomes the new normal after this.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you see radio being trusted more than newspapers or online or other forms of media in terms of getting information over?
Yes, actually, I do. I mean, so many things about humanity changed with the global pandemic, from individuals to whole lives. What we see is that many old certainties collapsed, and other things developed in ways that couldn't have been foreseen. But radio seems to take on a whole new life. It wasn't just that it was a background soundtrack to millions of isolated people in their homes, but it was a lifeline to families, friends, and whole communities. So what we've seen in our membership is that across the globe, people tuned in. Older people returned to the medium on which they have been raised. Younger people discovered for the first time the interconnectedness that radio could bring, whether it's live, streamed, or podcast. And new ways of production developed. So it really was a little bit of a heyday for radio, in that we as broadcasters and our audience is reconnected to each other.
Philo, do you see this as well? Do you see it being both, an interesting technical time, but also good in terms of trust for the medium as well?
Interesting question, James. I think that there's been a lot of trust on traditional mediums with the pandemic, because I think everyone has been using social media to sort of spread all sorts of news. So there has been a bit of infodemic. And that has really confused a lot of people. So this is where traditional media really picked up. And I think there's been a boom where radio listening is concerned, and also television. I shouldn't be talking about it, but it's working for both mediums, which are traditional we're talking about.
Is that still going?
Yeah, it's still here,
television.
Of course, and it's still going, especially during the pandemic, despite OTT, despite everything, and the same goes for radio. And a while ago, I think you mentioned about being in a pandemic, you don't have to go to work. You could actually sit where you are right home and then do any interviews you want with any expert anywhere. And that liberty only radio has. So I think most of radio has always been remote. Broadcasting remotely in that respect, and I think we are not so shocked as how the television people are. Yeah, but the only thing that I found as a person from the media, and now sitting on board, looking at all my colleagues in the many countries in Asia Pacific, is that the lack of information or the know-how on what to communicate about the pandemic or COVID-19. So that was the biggest issue. And we don't have a database of experts, So although radio is like remote, easily accessible and everything, the technical know-how on how to actually approach the subject of COVID-19, what to say to audiences, that was missing. So I guess we are filling that void here at AIBD. Yep.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about journalism. Anders, you're a trained journalist. You read journalism at Stockholm University. With things like Facebook and WhatsApp and Line and Telegram, all those other services, what part does radio play in news reporting?
I mean, in general, we know from research made by the European Broadcasting Union, for instance, that the radio is the most trusted medium. And that is not because it's a radio device. It's because of the tradition, how people have consumed radio and how it has come into their lives and what's come out of the speakers over the years. So I think really true in independent news media is extremely important in a time of crisis. And of course, there must be different voices heard on the topics, but still trusted and trained journalists doing a really professional job is so important, especially in a crisis. And we've seen then also that the trust in traditional media, as Olga mentioned, has risen. So there is even more trust, and people tend to go more and listen to more news and information on radio during this pandemic. So it's extremely important. It's not just for the listenership. I mean, we can all be happy then more people listen to our radio stations, but also because of the whole community then being informed, as Phil also mentioned, you know, so they really are also given really trustworthy information, and all the questions can be asked, and experts can explain things. Then it can be debated, of course. What should we do about this? But really get the good information out is so extremely important. I think we all can agree on that. It's just then how do you really combat the misinformation that is going out on so many platforms? I mean, the platforms are useful in many ways, but they are also a stepping stone for a lot of misinformation. And we have to just train ourselves within the broadcasting industry how to react to this context of misinformation going out, and how do we spot the misinformation, so we're not forwarding it ourselves just because it's spectacular. So there is this new rumor, and we talk about it on the radio without even checking if it's true. So there we have to be very careful ourselves, and not just take up interesting topics to speak about because it's just spectacular, but really be careful about what we bring forward and so on. So this is it's been coming for a couple of years, of course. It's already here, but it's a really big challenge for all news media in the coming years.
Yeah, Achana, you have a very small team. Wikipedia says 10, so it won't be 10 people, but it'll be something like that. Never trust Wikipedia. But how do you know what's fake news and what's real news? How do you help people know what the truth is and what the rumors are?
So, I think in India, radios played a very important role, not only community radios, but also the private channels. And we had around 250 myths going around, which we built scripts and shared and tried to bust those myths. In the meanwhile, we did a lot of training on, digital media literacy and media and information literacy. So a lot of online trainings were going on. And our catch line was, Socho, Samjho, Fir Share Karo. This is in Hindi, but let me tell you, Socho means think, Samjho means understand, and Fir Share Karo, only then share. So you have to think, understand, and only then share. So that was the logo, which was, that was the strapline which was going around. So we had to, in a certain way, I think we played a very important role by first of all, ours was that don't isolate communities, reach out, don't discriminate, don't spread fake information. And in India, we had very funny things that, you can drink cow urine and you'll be cured of COVID, or you can stand in the sun because sun god is there and you can be cured, or because you have some very age-old temple, so the goddess will not allow corona to enter your home. So, because we have several layers of civilizations coexisting. So it was a huge challenge, but I think that having said that, each one did their bit. But the biggest challenge here is because private radios and community radios are not allowed to broadcast news. So that's why we felt that this was our moment, because the government realized that even if I look at my own radio station, the government was tweeting about it and the good work that we are doing. Discovery was coming and covering our work and things like that. So I thought that that thin line, we broke that thin divide between news and current affairs and development news or news which concerns the community. So COVID again gave us that little opportunity where we were talking as it was happening. So we were getting information, people were calling us up, and we had the, access to the ministries, things, the websites and WHO, and that's how we were getting our content and busting myths and preparing scripts. and sending them. So we were literally working 24/7 round the hour because it was beyond our comprehension how fake news was spreading. And even things which were happening in the US were reaching us faster than what our government was trying to say. That drink a sanitizer. That really went crazy. It was like fire, and everybody was talking about it. Is it possible? And in villages, people were asking us. But for us, just to sum up, is that yes, there were lots of myths going, and I think all radios played an important part, and we broke that little, we broke that line which was created between news and development news, and we were able to inform people in real time.
Well, thank you. And there's another thing, of course, about radio during a pandemic. Many parts of the world have been in lockdown for weeks or even months, and that's had an effect on our mental health, with many people feeling lonely and some of them feeling even afraid. Philo, let me start with you on this. How important is radio for people's mental health and to feel connected with other people?
It's an interesting question, James. Right. I think one of the things that COVID-19 brought about was psychosocial aspect of whatever mental health that you're talking about. None of us were ready for this. I just remember the first day that we went into lockdown, the government announced this, and next day, everyone did not come to work. We were just at home, and everyone in my family was just sitting, and we were wondering what to do, right? But I'm talking about many people who are stuck in homes which are like, a lot of people live in apartments, small homes, some people live alone. And these kind of situations have given rise to psychosocial or mental health issues as well. So I think the rate of suicide was quite a lot. And you asked an interesting question about radio. Of course, as a radio person, a futurologist, the way people consume radio has also changed. A lot of people have stopped looking at radio as the intimate medium that it's supposed to be. I think the handphone has replaced that. I take my phone everywhere I go, and I listen to YouTube or whatnot. So this listening thing has sort of ceased to exist. We don't care, and we don't have radio sets anymore, because radio comes in all other platforms. So I think that's the biggest, drawback ever for the radio industry. Right? Like those days you used to have a radio set in the house. So yeah, and so if you ask me, the only thing that radio could do to allay the human fear is the kind of right information that it gave. Because people got fed up of whatever was on social media. I think Archana was talking about a very good example in India, where there were so many myths about sanitizer, and even in Malaysia we had such things. So this is where radio, the news, and on radio, actually, every day, I'm giving you the example of Malaysia, we had the DG of the Health Ministry, who himself was giving a regular feedback on what's happening on COVID-19. So that became a program that everyone was listening to. And and he kept saying that, Malaysia is not too bad, you're doing okay. So I guess when Malaysia was concerned, I don't know, this kind of credible information that came help to keep the mental state of people okay. But I won't say that radio was the only tool that assisted in that. I'm not supposed to only give the credit to radio. I think it's the listening habit of people also enhanced during this period. So there was a lot of drama or music or things like that radio programmers started doing. I see this style in India, also with our colleagues in Bhutan, who came up with very many interesting lockdown stories. So obviously these kind of content kept people's mental state, sane. No, the sanity was there, yes. Mm-hmm.
Indeed, yes. Olya, I've seen a lot of research actually coming out of the UK about radio lifting people's mood during these times. Do you have any similar data from your members in terms of what radio's effect is on people's mood?
Oh, of course. I mean, the first thing I have to say is that radio is on every platform. So it's not just about the radio sets. Now, all of our radio stations have a social media profile. They've got apps, so they're everywhere. And what we found is that what our members started to talk about is that it's not what in the beginning, radio was all about information and informing the public of what to do, and you saw all those jingles coming out, washing your hands, and it was great. And for example, VOV, they were the first ones and it just went viral with the washing your hands. KBS radio did something with all of their stars as well, and they were talking about how to wash your hands, how to stay home, how to be nice to each other at home, and then it's turned to entertainment. I think our pillars are educate, inform, entertain, and I think that last one came into its own after a while, because people needed to be entertained. You need to take people's minds off the horrible stuff that was happening everywhere. I mean, the infodemic and everything else, and as I said, we didn't find that the infodemic, yes, it was horrible, and there was such an abundance of information, but because all of our public broadcasters, for example, were on so many different platforms, they actually went on the front foot in terms of talking about what the information that was out there, the infodemic, how you should do things, who you should listen to. And because the people are actually trusted, the people who are on radio, they're the local celebrities really in their own communities. People trust them. And so when they started talking about their own experiences and sharing what happened to them, it actually worked really well. And across the board, we saw that. And just one last thing, ABU in particular, we found that our biggest plus was our membership base, and we always talk about how the ABU is a family, and that family really came into its own because we put together, for example, a COVID database. So all our members, we now have thousands, like tens of thousands of content on the database of how people coped, the different programs, the different initiatives, the different fact checks, and everything else, and people sharing this information, and actually were able to benefit from everybody else's experience. So like a family, we came together when we needed each other most. And it really helped all our members, and it helped us to learn, what is best for our members and for our audiences.
Achana, how about education? Many places have closed their schools. I believe in your radio station's area, less than a third of people have access to a TV as well. So what part does radio play in education during a pandemic?
Yes, schools were closed, and online is not an option for everyone. Because, online education, you need to have the space. If you have 3 children, you should have 3 connections because the classes are going on simultaneously, and you should have that much space. So, we work on SDGs also, and we know that this is taking a very bad hit, education. And even today, as we speak, it's almost now a year. The schools have not yet opened. It's only for class 10, which is like a board exam, and for class 12, which is another board exam, which helps you get into college. So we have been running something called radio tuitions, and now the government of India is using all the radio stations, whether it's private or commercial, private, commercial, or community radio, to impart classes. So we, particularly community radios, because we have taken development, the entire burden of development is on our shoulders. So all community radio stations are broadcasting 2 to 3 hours of just classes and curriculum oriented programs for the children. The impact has not been studied. I can very well understand if children are not listening to those programs, because it can get very boring. Because online, of course, children still put off their cameras and go and play for some time and come back. But how do you keep the attention of the children? This is something, James, that we'll all have to really put our minds to and understand how much of a setback it has been. And so that's a huge crisis, and we've already started talking about it. But another thing which I wanted to talk about here is mental health, because in India we don't talk about mental health. We are not like the developed advanced countries where a lot of things are taken care of, and then people have started talking about mental health and issues of, depression and all. But during the pandemic, I'm happy to say that everybody was talking about it, and particularly the health of women. There was a lot of programming on that which was happening. There were a lot of counselors who were available online, and a lot of counseling sessions which were happening on radios. And I think that is what kept people's sanity intact. So the number of suicides in India has not been very high. And this whole thing of, this is a phase which will soon go away, so keep your spirits high. There was a huge crisis of unemployment, which we don't even talk about. So a lot of programs on how to, do skill development, how to upgrade your skills. So the whole challenge was to keep your communities engaged, whether it was for education, whether it was for good health, whether it was optimism, whether it was hope, whether it was humor. And I think that is what the radio stations have been able to achieve.
Thank you. Last year in Australia, we had one radio survey that was absolutely fascinating to watch. It happened while Melbourne was in full lockdown. Brisbane was almost unaffected with the pandemic, so it allowed us to compare audience figures from similar markets, worked out in the same way, but in very different states of the pandemic. And what we saw there is that in places with the pandemic, more Australian audiences chose speech radio. More Australian audiences tuned in for the daily updates from government ministers. And rather than radio going down, it increased, which is a very good thing. Anders, you're in contact with lots of radio stations around the world. Did you see the same positive effect on radio audience figures?
Absolutely. I mean, in general, we have seen radio listening going up during the pandemic, but it has also, of course, changed. I mean, the habits have changed. So also the listening has changed. So you don't have the early morning listening so much anymore, but actually people tend to get up slightly later. They will not get into a car to go to work. So the listening habits during the day has shifted, but in general, radio listening has gone up. As we talked about previously, we see also the trust, and that you turn to a trusted medium, of course, for information, but also for entertainment, and someone to accompany you as a friend when you are in a difficult situation. We indeed, and also on what Olya mentioned about radio community sharing their experience, we had this Facebook group set up by radio stations, the Coronavirus Radio Ideas Facebook group. You can still go there and find hundreds of ideas of what radio stations did when lockdown came and coronavirus hit the world, actually. So everywhere around the world. And there were so many good ideas, we actually decided to give out awards to the really best ideas. So we picked the best ideas and put them out for voting among the broadcast community, and we gave away 12 categories of awards to radio stations around the world. But there were hundreds of great ideas of the innovation capability of radio stations. And I just mentioned a few, which I think are interesting. On mental health, there were many stations doing things exactly what we talked about, addressing the mental health. So there would be campaigning, for instance, to help organizations who were helping with mental health in Ireland, for instance, and also campaigning to inform people about call-ins and all of that. But also I want to mention something else which was quite interesting. In Denmark, for instance, they started a program and a podcast for kids about what's happening with coronavirus. So actually kids asking the questions and talking about their situation and giving a voice to the small children, and also answering their questions about what's really happening when school is closed and so much is in lockdown and the whole world has changed. So there is a willingness to share among the radio community, which is wonderful, I think.
Yeah, and 13 winners across 13 categories from all over the world as well, I noticed, which is really nice. So, and one winner from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, one from Sydney in Australia, and one from NRG Radio in Kenya. All kinds of things. A virtual concert sounds an interesting idea. Olia, what have been the effects in audience figures in Asia that your members have seen?
Well, of course, when you say Asia, pick a country. In Asia, we had some countries that weren't terribly affected. They were affected, but in the long scheme of things, for example, Vietnam was handled their situation very, very well, and they continued to pump out information. So, and then we've got people like, for example, Indonesia, who are going through many waves and everything in between. So most of the radio stations that we've spoken to have had very similar experiences. So their initial audience figures went up, and then there was a bit of a plateau. And then they started thinking about how else do we reach our audiences. So that's when the mental health stuff started to come in, the talk back again. People started talking to each other to offer them also a chance to talk back between each other, not just with the presenters and the audience, to actually connect people to people who couldn't actually physically go and see each other. In Australia, as you probably know, the ABC had this a little show where grandkids would talk to their grandparents who were not allowed to see each other, and it was really sweet in that they would send messages back and forth, and grandma, grandpa, I really want to see you, when are you going to come? It was really very sweet. And in Indonesia, for example, RRI went out into their communities and they delivered education programs to remote communities where kids just couldn't participate, particularly children who were disabled. So there was a massive sort of range of things that radio did in Asia. But overall, the feeling was that they connected with their audiences much more. Up to now, I think the proof is still in the pudding. I mean, it seems like the audiences are holding up. So this is, I guess, we now are looking at how do we do this into the future? How do we keep that?
Philo, the thing that I found interesting about the data that I saw was that audiences are choosing speech radio rather than music. Music's really easy and cheap to do. Have you seen more of a focus on speech radio as well?
Good point, Cridlin. The thing is, can you hear me, right?
I can.
Okay, yeah, all right. I think all of you are talking about, what's happening to what people want from radio. And again, you mentioned about speech or talk, right? So one thing is very clear. You asked a while ago about mental health. Now, in any crisis, I've seen this in the crisis when there was a tsunami way back in 2004. I was the head of the radio at that time, and people were calling non-stop to say, look, I want to share about what's happening right now. I'm off. This is what's happening with the tsunami situation. And everybody was calling me from everywhere. So one of the things that the innate need for humans is to talk. And I know you're talking about the success stories, but I think we also have to look at the future of radio. And this pandemic should actually teach us how to utilize this medium even more. And your fact on the speech is so important because humans have the need to talk. And which platform is going to give you, that facility to actually talk, remain anonymous, and share? And radio has to go back to that. And I think that's the most crucial and important role. And of course, as AIBD being an international organization with media and so forth, that's what we're doing to our people. We're teaching the entire region to revitalize the radio industry, to look back, to make it work again, and to look at talk radio. So radio is music, but most importantly, it's a talk channel, a place for one to share. I think that's what human beings want. We all want to talk. And radio has provided that platform, and we should continue to strengthen that. I see it from what Archana is saying. And, in a lockdown situation, some countries, of course, like Olia was talking about Indonesia, people can go out. But in most countries, people are not allowed to go out. They're stuck at home. And the only way that you can get rid of this mental torture or of loneliness or being stuck in this is to talk. I'm facing that, I'm working from home for a long time, and I long for this talking. Thank God to Zoom, I'm able to connect with everybody. But what about people who are not talking? So this is where talk radio is so important. And I think, James, that's actually an important component for most programmers to look at.
And Achana, do you have any any numbers on how your station did? And do you think that this is a good time for community radio, particularly, to shine over commercial broadcasters?
It's never an either-or situation because our mandates are different, the way we operate are different, the kind of programming we do is different. So, of course, there's always a lot of scope to learn from each other. But in India, if you look at it, there was a survey and there has been an increase of 23% of listenership in the radio. So, radio is booming, and if you look at overall the world's figures, then we all know that 83% of our listeners tuned into the radio. So in India also we've faced the same kind of situation, and the reasons we've already discussed through your questions is that, they feel more at home, it's more comfortable, it's anonymous, you can connect with people, your voice is heard, and you can ask questions, and it's more of a here and now kind of medium, especially when we talk about community radios. The authorities feel very comfortable calling you and saying, I have a broadcast to make, and okay, how do you want to do it? Say it now. We'll record it and we'll play it. It's like that. So it's, when one side we talk about the advancement of technology, the other side we also talk about the basic technology, which is comfortable for everybody to use, everybody to call in, and everybody to feel that they own the platform, So that ways, I think that this was the moment for community radios. For us, I keep insisting on this, but I think the government also realized the importance, and that is where the catch is, because, otherwise we are somebody who's there, who's licensed by the government, but not taken seriously. During the pandemic, the community radios were taken so seriously because we had access to, our community is the hardest to reach, the most discriminated, the most marginalized people. And that is where the government also wanted to reach out, and even people wanted to reach out. Obviously, advertisers were not there, but in a certain way, we proved to the world that we can make a difference, we can influence behavior change. And as Olia was saying, the hand washing thing, and UNICEF and others in India have been saying that something that we couldn't get done in the last so many years, 70 years, one pandemic could get it done in 3 months. So the whole emphasis on hygiene, the whole emphasis, and I really understand and I hear what Philo was saying, that this connection, this need to feel that you're not alone in this whole battle, that radios were able to reach out to communities and bring people from different parts of the world to speak just like we are speaking right now.
Well, that's a wonderful point to end. That's all the time we have. For many people across the world, when they've been unable to see their family, radio has been the only friend they've been able to have in their home. It's a privilege to be part of this industry at this time. Please join me in thanking all of our panel at the Radio Festival 2021.